I always wanted freedom, and that's really why I bootstrapped. And then later on, I realized, well, I have freedom. I actually want purpose as well. Funding is just a tool, you know?
When you left, how did you feel at that time?
I took 6 months off. I did not know what I was going to do next. TinySeed was not an idea at that point.
Hey, awesome people. Welcome to Bootstrap Stories, the only podcast where founders of bootstrap companies share in all transparency the ups and downs of their journey. Starting a business comes hand in hand with loneliness, the pressure of not being successful, and overall, lots of challenges. After meeting with hundreds of entrepreneurs in the past years, I figured out that we all have struggles and make lots of mistakes when building a business. But the truth is that most people are afraid to share this publicly. That's what motivated me to start this podcast, to show that we're all on the same journey, facing the same struggles, and to give energy to all entrepreneurs worldwide to continue their adventure. Even if sometimes it can be really challenging and we often feel like giving up, in the end, it's all worth it. My guest for this episode is Rob Walling, serial entrepreneur and founder at TinySeed. Hi, Rob. Welcome to Bootstrap Stories.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm super excited to start talking. You have like a really, really interesting path. And before jumping into the discussion, I want to let you know kind of how we'll structure the episode, so you're sure like not to miss anything. First, I want to find out what pushes a bootstrap founder to raise funds. I'm really curious to find the answer, since I know that years ago you grew your startup to an 8-figure bootstrap. In the second part of the podcast, we'll have a real founders chat and we'll talk about your biggest struggles and challenges. And in the last part, I would love to talk about your learnings, you know, like the good and the bad. And since you've moved from growing a business without external funds to raising money from investors, I bet a lot of people are curious to find your advice on this. Sounds good?
Love it.
Awesome. So before jumping into what pushed you to raise funds, I want to focus a little bit more on what happened with your previous successes. So you've bootstrapped Drip, which was an email marketing tool. And then after 3 years, you sold it to Lead Pages. Can you disclose a bit like your metrics when you sold it? What was the idea behind selling it, and why you've done it?
Yeah. The metrics, I mean, I don't remember everything, but it was, let's say it was a low 7-figure ARR at the time. Okay. So it was a substantial, it was, many millions in terms of the purchase price. The reason we sold was, that's interesting, actually. It was because it was a logical conclusion for that business. I was either going to raise a small amount of money or we were going to sell it, because it was a cash constrained business. It was very expensive to run. It required a lot of people. You know, Drip was an email service provider, became a marketing automation provider. And in that, there are literally hundreds of competitors, and they have literally billions of dollars in funding. And I've never been scared of funded competition because we have our own advantages as bootstrappers. But by the time we were doing $2 million, team size of 10, I could really use $500,000 or $1 million to go faster and just compete. And so I was in the process of saying, should I raise a small angel round? See, I've never been a bootstrapper religist, right? Like, this is the only way to go. I mean, I started blogging and writing about bootstrapping 16 years ago. I've written 3 books on it. I have 600 podcast episodes on bootstrapping. And yet it's a tool. Like, funding is just a tool, you know? And I never wanted to go the venture track, but there are in-betweens, right? There are ways to raise small amounts of funding and not do it. So
I was like that little teaser for the next part.
For TinySeed, yeah. There's nuance to funding, right? It's not all or nothing, basically. They're different paths. So anyways, we were getting approached by a lot of folks who wanted to acquire us. I was kind of weighing that with raising a funding round, and it turns out, selling to Lead Pages was going to be a good outcome for all the shareholders or all the stakeholders, right? I think of our customers, our employees, our founders, and the acquirer. And if it was a quadruple win, then it made sense to do.
Awesome. And so you were saying at the time you were about like 10-ish in the team, or were you
10?
Like,
yeah,
10. Okay,
10 people, and it was that point. I mean, to be honest, I was not willing to sell unless we could get a sum of money where I could never have to work again. Now I knew I was going to work again, right? But that was the moment. I mean, that was also, I'll say, a tipping point. I'm a pure lifestyle business entrepreneur, basically. And my first job, I made $4 an hour, $4.50 an hour out of, and it's like, for me to actually have a sum of money to where it's like, I can really get the freedom that I've always wanted. That was a big mental piece of it for me.
And after 3 years, it's also like a really great accomplishment.
And
it was fast.
Yeah, it was really fast. And do you feel like your employees, like were they like kind of forced to stay in the company? Were they scared? Like, how did you like brought them like the
That's a good
acquisition?
question.
Yeah. And did they get any money out of it also?
Yeah, so no one was forced to stay. Everyone was given an option. It was just, I had a co-founder, Derek Reimer, who people may have heard of if they listen to the Art of Product podcast. And he and I were, locked up in essence for, it was actually a short amount of time compared to most acquisitions, but we had a contract that said if you leave, then you leave money on the table. All the employees could leave anytime. They were at will purely. And so they were given the option to stay. They got a bonus. They all got a raise. Like somebody got like a 40% raise or something. I mean, it was really nice. Derek and I did, no one owned equity, but Derek and I. And so we did wind up giving them just some cash payouts as like, thanks for being here. I mean, there was somebody who had worked for us for 2 months, and then others, I think the longest tenure at the time, since the company was 3.5 years old. But I mean, Derek and I were it was just he and I for the first 18 months, right? So the longest tenure of anyone else on the team was like 18 months. So it wasn't like you invested 10 years of your life, it was like, here's a token and thanks. Of the 10, 4 of us moved to Minneapolis, totally optionally, right? Of like, because that's where Lead Pages was located. Now Drip has become, it's almost like Drip acquired Lead Pages, if you know the full story, right? Drip is now the company and they've sold off Lead Pages.
No, that's really, really cool. And do you feel like when you had like this earn-out period, so the time where you were kind of like forced to stay at the company, how did the transition go? Because I usually like when I talk to founders who sell and who are forced to stay at a company for, let's say, like 2 years or something, there is really kind of this bad blood between the acquirer and the founder, because everything changes. You see kind of like your baby evolving, not in the right direction. How did it go and how long was that period?
It was, I will be honest, that it was mixed, but not through any fault of the acquirer. I will say that Clay was the CEO at the start, and then about a year in, a different CEO named John took over. Clay kept all his promises. He and I are both founders. And he happened to be a venture-backed founder with 38 million in the bank, and I happen to be a bootstrap founder, but he and I saw eye to eye on a lot of things. I feel like they kept every promise to us that they made, right? Of like, we're going to protect the team, we're going to grow the product, we're going to give you buckets of money like you've never seen to grow it, and all of that took place. I still struggled though. You and I are cut from the same cloth, much like a lot of your listeners. We're unemployable. Is really the phrase. I told Clay, I said, you realize I'm going to be the worst employee you've ever had, even though I'm going to drive results, I'm going to get shit done, I'm going to hire, I'm going to do it. But I don't like meetings and I don't like one-on-ones, checking in with me how I'm doing. I'm doing fine. Thanks. You know what I mean? It's like, alone. Yeah, exactly. Like, I don't want an annual, please don't annual review me. I don't want to raise. Just don't do that. So I say that jokingly, but like, I'm that person, right? I'm that guy. So I'm not the easiest to work with. However, I did drive results. I think that within a bigger company, we went from a company of 10 to a company of 180, right? Because it was like, they were 170, we were 10. That was a huge culture shock to us. The Slack was like, oh, good Lord, there's just stuff everywhere. It felt like noise. So there were culture shocks in that respect. I also didn't love, I went and started going into an office every day. No one was checking my time or anything, but I did feel like, well, I have this team now. I mean, at the time I left, I only owned product and engineering instead of the whole team, right? But just product and engineering was 20 people. And the team focused on Drip was over 100 at that point, gone up from 10. So I did feel an obligation. And when I feel obligations, it doesn't feel great. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
and that's what I realized. That's a big reason for me. Like, feel like I'm good at growing a team or to X amount of revenue or X amount of size, but really, Rob Walling want to manage 100 people? I don't. Like, that's not appealing to me. And so, that's where it left. So I wound up sticking around. I could have left a lot earlier than I did. I left at, I believe, 20 months. So just under 2 years. Okay. But I could have left quite a bit earlier than that. And still, received all the money. I actually so that tells you I was having enough fun and I was learning enough. That was a big thing for me, I was still learning, and I was learning in a way that you can't learn outside of a company that's moving that fast, and it was still interesting.
So you feel like the learning was more important than the money you could get, or during the earnout, It
was both. to be honest. I mean, the money was right. I'm pretty frugal. I grew up with not a lot of money. So to me, money is important because I always wanted freedom. And that's really why I bootstrapped. And then later on, I realized, well, I have freedom. I actually want purpose as well. And so freedom and purpose and relationships became my mantras. But yes, no, the money was important, but also the moment I stopped learning, that's when I got bored. And in fact, when, Drip, the new team, the senior leadership team pivoted, I was on it, but they pivoted into e-commerce. And that was when I was like, this isn't for me. I don't know e-commerce. I don't really care to learn it. It's just not a lifelong thing. I have other things to do. And that's when I was like, I think it's time someone to come in and, and essentially replace me.
Nice. And you also had like another startup, right? HitTail.
And it was a smaller one.
And you decided also to sell it in parallel. Was it something you did with your existing co-founders, or how did it go exactly?
HitTail was just mine, and it was the lifestyle business, the bootstrap lifestyle business that changed my life. I went from making, prior to that, I was making a full-time living in California with my products. Let's say $120,000 to $150,000 a year. It's a good living. I can make the rent, right? I have a wife and a kid, and it's like I'm not in California. You're not rich making that much, but you can make a house payment and have a great life. So I had freedom at that point. Then I started getting bored, and I wanted to either build or buy another SaaS. And that was when HitTail came across my radar. It was an existing app that was failing and that had been left behind, and it was dying. I was a customer of it, and it was just being neglected. It was doing like $1,500 a month, right? So very small. At its peak, it had done $5,000 or $6,000. It had been around for 5 years. It was just an app that was not going well. So I actually acquired it from the previous owner and spent about 5 months rewriting the code base, having someone redesign it,
How much was the acquisition for a tool making like 1,500?
Yeah, it was, it was doing 1,500, the hosting alone. So it was hosted on a physical server in a cage in Manhattan, because it had been built in 2006. And this was 2011 when I bought it, right? So it was just old school. So hosting was $1,200 for a cage, and it was doing 1,500. I paid $30,000 for it.
Okay.
And I later, I put all my development chops into it because it was unstable. I had to move it to new servers, all this stuff. And then I put all my marketing push behind it, which was okay at the time. I was a decent marketer 10 years ago, not as good as I am now. I wound up growing it to 30,000 a month, 30,000 MRR. So
nice.
350K a year-ish.
How long did it take to go from this 1,500 to 30K?
Yeah, it took, so I 10x'd. So first I spent 5 months with no growth because I was just rewriting an infrastructure, right? So by 5 months in, I had the same amount. It was like 1,500 or $2,000. So then I 10x'd it in 15 months. So I went to almost 20 grand in 15 months. And then I got it up to 30. It took me about another 6 to 9 months. So it took me less than 2 years, I'll say. And I already had a product, and it kind of had product market fit, but kind of didn't. I had to find that. And then so then we were building a little add-on to HitTail to capture emails and do some things, and nothing was really, Mailchimp wasn't that great at it, and we didn't want to use Aweber. And so we built a little tool for ourselves, and then we're like, wait a minute, why don't other companies use this tool? And that's what actually became Drip. That was 2012. Nice. And then as Drip was going to be another, let's just do a great lifestyle business and pull cash out. But it kind of got a life, it took on a life of its own and became a much bigger opportunity than I first expected. And but as Drip was just kind of hockey sticking like I had never experienced, it became obvious that HitTail I was neglecting it. And by the time I sold it, it was under 20K a month. It was declining because no one was doing anything on it.
In any case, you still had done your, let's say 12x, and I guess the exit was not too bad as well.
Exit was great. Yeah. Exit was in mid 6 figures or something. So that was also, again, a life-changing moment. It wasn't, I could never have to work again, but it was, wow, I've never had that much money in a bank account. And to me, that was a level of safety that even if everything goes to hell tomorrow, I at least have years of living in the bank. And that made me feel calm.
But I think that's really nice because, you had this, acquiring a new product, growing it, getting the confidence that you're ready, to make even more money, then get the exits. But I think what was really nice with this, and that's something we did also with one of our projects called Mpod, we grew it to $600,000 in ARR, sold it, and then we had Lemlist in parallel, so it was an easy switch, a bit like you with Drip and the product. But then you sold Drip. You had these 2 years where you had burnout, etc. But when you left, how did you feel at that time? Did you already have like TinySeed in mind? Did you already know what you were doing, or you were like, okay, I spent these last 2 years in really like fast growing environment, managing like so many people, things that I don't want to do anymore. Like, do I need a break, or how exactly did it went?
Those are all good questions. I took 6 months off and I didn't do anything. I played a bunch of tabletop games and played my guitar. I would recommend anyone who sells a company, if you have any kind of time, to take at least 3 months completely off. If you've been, I was kind of burned out. I mean, there were a bunch of things that happened, right? I did not know what I was going to do next. TinySeed was not an idea at that point. But what I did have was the things that I had been doing for 10 to 15 years, and I had been doing those as a hobby for free on the side. So Startups for the Rest of Us is the oldest and I think the largest podcast about bootstrapping startups. And that was on episode 450 or something. Now it's on episode almost approaching 600, right? Every week we ship that. And so I knew I was going to keep doing that because it was just part of who I was. I was thinking about writing another book, right? I've written 3 books on bootstrapping startups. I was thinking about doing a 4th. I actually have about a quarter of that book written. And then I was like, all right, slow down. And then MicroConf, which is an online community and in-person events for bootstrap SaaS founders. So, and that's been since 2010, right? So even when I left Drip in 2018, I was 8 years into that, and we'd run 20 events or something. So I knew that there was an underlying thread that I would return to, but I didn't know what it would look like. I didn't know if I was just going to double down, hey, write another book, do more podcasts, do more events, more community. That was kind of what I was thinking. And over the course of that 6 months, I really realized I had started investing, right? When I, again, as a mostly, so you and I are bootstrapped, but we're kind of not, okay? We self-funded ourselves, right? If you think about Drip, I took almost 200 grand out of HitTail to start Drip. So while you can say that's bootstrapped, it's not when I bootstrapped in 2009, I had no money, right? But to take a couple $100 grand I call it self-funding. I funded myself with a prior product, and you stair-step your way up, right? Stair-step approach. But all that to say, I had written some small angel checks to bootstrap founders who I consider, look, if you've raised less than $500,000, $1 million, you're mostly bootstrapped. I mean, you're not venture track. Like there's a very different thing. So I had written, been part of $200,000, $500,000 rounds where I'd put in 20 grand or 25 grand into these small startups, but they weren't going for unicorn Facebook exits. They were going to, can we sell for 20 million, 10 million? Nice. These will be great, 5x, 10x, 20x return, whatever. And that idea was really intriguing to me. And I think I had about a dozen by that point in 2018. And I was continuing to be asked, like, will you write more checks? And I was kind of like, I don't really have, I don't want to get so overweight these startups because they're not liquid for 10 years, right? Or 5 years till an exit or whatever. And someone said, wow, someone should really raise a fund to invest like you are. And I said, yes, someone should do that. I remember saying, I kind of walked away. There was a conference talk where I literally did that. And then I started thinking, wait a minute, if anyone, exactly. So that's what it became. It's like, if anyone's going to do that, it probably should be me. I had written down the phrase YC for bootstrappers back in 2011 in a notebook. And I was just like, look, we're bootstrappers. I don't want to deal with the bullshit. I don't want to raise funds. I don't want to manage a fund, blah, blah, blah. But then in 2018, I connected with my co-founder of TinySeed, and he's more on the finance side and the fundraising side. And I said, if you'll handle all of the stuff I don't want to do, I'm happy to write checks. I'm happy to mentor and advise founders. I'm happy to build, an accelerator, but I don't want to do a certain aspect of it. And that was truly a complementary relationship there.
That's really nice. And was it your co-founder who basically handled the part with the VCs? Or did you raise the fund yourself? Did you went to see entrepreneurs who had done exit? How exactly did you got this? You raised 25 million, right?
Yeah. Well, we've raised almost 40 now.
Oh, 40. Yeah, okay.
The first fund was 4.5, and the second one was 28, and the third one, the Europe one, will be about 10, and we're just about to close that. Nice. So I guess it's north of 40, but it was both. He handled not the hard conversations, but the closing of do you actually want to, sign and write checks and such. At our size and we're emerging managers, they're called. We're just an early stage startup or an early stage fund. Typically, institutional money will not write checks to you, right? You can't get a family office or an endowment. The Yale endowment is not going to write TinySeed a check because they need 10 years of track record or whatever. So we have, I believe, one fund who did wind up investing, and almost everyone else is a wealthy individual who usually is an entrepreneur, and they are a startup founder who either had an exit or has an amazingly profitable business. And that has wound up, being the big part of the fund. And obviously the fund is now sitting, we do a capital call, it sits in a bank account, and then we're able to deploy that into individual startups. And we've funded just under 60 SaaS companies to date.
Wow, that's really nice. And two things. First, let's look at your relationship with your investors. And then we'll go the other way around. So how exactly does that work? Like, do you have to do them like monthly reporting, quarterly reporting? Do you feel like because the fund is mixed with so many different individuals, do you feel like some are like really a pain in the ass and others not? You're not forced to say any name.
Yeah,
if any. How exactly does that work?
Yeah, it's interesting. Since we're like, if I were a SaaS startup that had raised funding, I would have one answer to that. But we are literally a venture fund. And so, yes, we have quite literally hundreds of investors. I would say we don't have any who have really been a problem, crossing my fingers, because eventually that'll happen. We do send a monthly investor update to each of the funds. There's 3 of them now. So we have 3 emails that go out. And in addition, we don't just report. It's not like we report and say, here's our MRR, here's our lifetime value, right? But we have a dashboard that we've built that they can log into and look at all of the companies that are under that fund, right? So there's 23 of them in the first one and 35 or whatever in the second. So far, so good on that. No regrets. I mean, like I said, I think I never was against raising investment. I was always against the headache of it and potentially the strings that might be attached to it, right? Or the expectations. And certainly here, that hasn't been an issue.
And what's your mindset whenever you're doing like an investment in a bootstrap company? Is it like, okay, here's the money, you're the founders, I'm 100% with you on the mindset, on the vision, on what you want to accomplish, and then that's it? Or do you ask for quarterly reporting, advanced financials, and all these things? How exactly does that work?
We don't ask for any type of advanced financials. We do some due diligence up front, right, to make sure everything's legit. But the only thing we ask for is a monthly email, just an update with your MRR. We actually give them here's an email template. You can use this one or use your own. But it's like, what are your basic metrics? What things are working for you? What's not? And what do you need help with? What are your asks, right? And so I was just going through, because it's the second of the month, right? So I just went through 20 updates this morning, and I read every one, but I replied to maybe 6 or 7 of them with, hey, great job on that. This number is looking better than last month. Awesome. What's working, right? Or, hey, do you need an intro? Because I see you're running AdWords. I know somebody who can do it if you don't want to, that kind of stuff, right? So I'm chiming in. But in addition, we also everyone's part of an accelerator. So it's a year-long program where we're on a 1-hour call every week, either with a mentor or with kind of a group we do the TinySeed playbook, where we're helping people understand hiring and sales and marketing and such.
So basically, after a year, they can go on their own. But during that year where you start the funding, you essentially help them with pretty much everything operational and things like that.
That's right. And we tell the founders, look, some founders opt out of that. Some founders say, I don't have time or I don't want to go to a mentor call. Then don't do it. Like, nothing is mandatory here except for really we do want the reporting to have some idea what the business is doing. But other than that, most founders lean in. We have in-person retreats 3 times a year. They come to those, but there's certainly folks who are just too busy, or they're more introverted and don't want the baggage of that.
That's really interesting. And I'm curious also, moving from being a SaaS founder to now, helping SaaS founder grow in a specific manner. What's your take on customer acquisition? Like, what have you seen with your 3 different companies? Where is it couple of things that worked every single time? Like, what's your feeling about that?
I mean, it's evolved over time, right? So in 2009, my customer acquisition approach was, was SEO content and ads, when ads were still reasonable to buy. These days, there's basically 5 the first 5, I call them. And if I were to start a B2B SaaS app, these are the first 5 things I would try, and not in this order, but I would pick the one. It's like depending on the space and this and that. It's cold outbound, which I think you're familiar with. It's content. It's SEO, and I separate content and SEO. Sometimes they are the same and sometimes they're not. So content, SEO, pay-per-click ads, and that can be Facebook, it can be AdWords, Google AdWords, it can be whatever. And then integrations and partnerships as the 5th one. I have made all of those work, except for outbound actually was one that we really struggled with at Drip. It like kind of broke even. But there are companies, there are a lot of companies, especially in TinySeed or in the microcomp space, that are making, those are the first 5 again. The 6th is the honorable mention. And of course, COVID hammered it, but in-person events are shockingly effective if if your lifetime value is over 15, 20 grand.
Nice. Yeah, definitely. I agree. Like once you can meet people in person, especially if your LTV is super high, it makes a huge impact. And when it comes to partnerships, I'm really curious because what are the things that you've seen really, really working well? Because what I see, with all these marketplaces like Slack or any CRMs who ask you, to build integrations or even Zapier, etc. From my understanding, I've never seen like a company really crushing it. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, there's some different ways to do it. So the advice that I normally give is don't do it with Slack or Stripe to start. Find someone who's about your same size or a little ahead of you, and then they're going to be much more likely to promote it. And the idea, whether it's an integration or just a co-promotion, let's just email our list, which I've done both. HitTail was, in the SEO space, was a big joint venture partnership. I reached out to like 8 SEO tools, and like all 8 got back to me. Let's do it, right? It was this really easy thing. With Drip, we actually had to build like small integrations in order to get it done. And it was a big piece, I called it integration marketing, right? We built north of 30 integrations in about 18 months. And it was it was to help customers, but it was also to get that co-promotion. And what I do is I would reach out to Zapier or to, back in it was like SendOwl, Gumroad, smaller shopping carts, WooCommerce, and say, hey, customers are requesting that we build an integration, which usually they were. And if we build it, I would love it. Here's what we plan to do. We're going to send an email to our list of 20,000 people. We're going to do an in-app message. We're going to do a blog post. We're going to do a tweet. We're going to give you a KB knowledge base article, and we have our integrations page you can see here. And we're going to add you to this. We would love it if you would reciprocate. And then I would wait and see. And if people jumped on that integration usually went high on the list, right? It was this exchange of marketing, co-marketing. Now, did every one of those work? Well, of course not. We actually we built a whole integration, we promoted it, and the other side ghosted us one time, right? And I was super frustrated. Yeah. But then we had enough of those work, like Pipedrive was such a good one for us. It didn't send tremendous traffic, but the traffic they sent converted like crazy. And we actually it converted so well, we created a custom landing page for that one where it was like, welcome Pipedrive customer. Here's how to, you know what I mean? Like we spent time on it. So there's a bunch, we could record literally a whole podcast just on that. But I think it's undervalued.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think once you found a partner that drives you like very relevant traffic, it makes a lot of sense. But as you said, I feel like if there's a really big difference in size, it doesn't usually work out. And I think people usually understand it very quickly when they get to a stage where they are so big that everyone is asking them about integrations and being listed. And then you realize, but everyone wants to grow, So sometimes it's quite tough. Comparing your days as, I would say like funded entrepreneur versus like a bootstrap one, what were for you like the biggest difference, if any?
The biggest difference is I do fewer things that I don't want to do because we hire people to do them. Honestly, when I was bootstrapping, I was so cash constrained that I could choose to hire another developer, or I could choose to hire like an actual operations person, and I would always hire the developer to move the product. And so I did a bunch of crap that I didn't want to. These days we can do both. we don't have infinity money, don't get me wrong, but we have enough budget that throwing $3,000, $5,000 a month at someone to just to manage payroll, HR, like legal, just anything that I don't want to do has made my life a lot easier. We can also move faster with it, right? We hire quality designers and people who who deliver and such. So I don't have to be so penny pinching.
That's really cool. And going back to Drip, early on during the podcast, you were mentioning the fact that you had all these competitors with $1 billion of funding. Mailchimp back in the days was not so much funded. I would say like they had maybe raised Bootstrap or raised like just a few $100,000. How did it feel like being with like seeing Mailchimp going so fast and you versus like all the funded companies? Like, was it frustrating? Was it tough? Was it did you feel like you could be even more creative, and was it like forcing you to become more creative so it was even more exciting? What was the feeling?
I like that question because it absolutely had an impact on us. And the feeling that I got, so Mailchimp, I was always like, they're amazing. Their execution was great. I mean, these days, I'll admit the product, it feels a little dated, but I mean, in 2012, when we were starting it, it was a good product. I've always respected Ben and his team. Like they ship and they're a good company. So I never wanted to go head to head with them, but I saw that there was a space above them, slightly more expensive with automation, right? With more advanced functionality, because Mailchimp couldn't move very fast because they had so many hundreds of thousands of customers, right? It's hard to move fast then. So entering into this space though, I did see these kind of, I knew email marketing, buckets of money going into it. And I knew that especially the larger incumbents, there were some really despised incumbents who were priced high, who didn't treat their customers very well, who didn't ship features fast, who actually had buggy apps. And these are tools like Infusionsoft, Entreport, even, I don't know, Marketo, Silverpop, I don't know if people have heard of them these days, and they were like $300 a month and up. So it's like, well, I know that we can build that and charge $100 for it or $150. And, it's not that I want to compete on price permanently, but if I build a better product, easier to use, and it's cheaper, like we can be agile, right? And so anyways, I was motivated by that. And my big thing is like, it's like in jiu-jitsu where you look at you use your strengths of your opponent against them. And that's what I always wanted to do, right? Is like, we can move fast and we can probably undercharge them, and we don't need to hit these growth benchmarks. So we can do things a little bit different. So I was motivated by it. I'll admit though, there were times when it was frustrating, when their engineering team of 50, was shipping things and it's like, we have 3 people. But that, we got on a list, there was like was it Mashable did like the top 10 marketing automation platforms, right? And they had like 400 that they selected from. And we were number 12, I believe. So it was top 20. We were number 12. And all of the other 19 had raised like 10 million or more. And we were bootstrapped, and we were in an office in Fresno, California. And at the time there were 5 of us. And I just chuckled to myself of like, we're doing something here. Like we're making a mark. And that was like a sense of pride for the team.
Yeah, I can definitely rely on that. I feel it's a bit a team of pirates, like going against a giant. It's a good feeling. But down the line, even though your product could have been compared to the one worth hundreds, it was still like targeting SMBs, mid-markets, and I'm assuming that churn might have been an issue down the line. Did you feel it, or was it never for you guys? Like, did you find like a good segment where your churn was actually like not an issue at all?
Churn was an issue until we hit product market fit. So once we hit it was around 15 or 20,000 a month, churn plummeted. And we because even SMBs, when they sign up for an email provider, they stick around. Like, unless they go out of business. So we were not targeting wannabe entrepreneurs, right? It's like, we didn't have the Pat Flynn's audience, for example. Like, I bet those people sign up for stuff and do it for 2 months and then cancel. And we didn't go after that space on purpose. We went after real businesses. And so while a few percent a year go out of business, it wasn't like it was a bunch of one-person shops. Our churn, we had net negative churn from the time we were at, I don't know, it was between 20 and 30,000 a month. We had net negative churn maybe 8-9 months of the year because of and obviously that's expansion revenue. We could go into it, but that's like the golden ticket of SaaS, right? Is if you can achieve that.
No, that's really cool. And did you test things on pricing? Just because I'm guessing that as you build up the features, something that most founder and me the first are afraid of is really to increase price. Every time you increase price, you your hands are shaking, you don't feel good, you're sweating. What's your experience with that?
Yeah, we completely screwed up pricing for the first 10K MRR, and I had to revamp it. We weren't based on subscribers, which everyone else was, and we thought that was this big novel thing, and it was a disaster. So we had to rework to V2 when we hit about 10K, and then by the time we sold, I believe we were on V4. So that was 2 more increase. So we just kept raising prices, which is exactly it. So this is the playbook of SaaS, right? Is your product's going to be crap when you build it. So you only have a couple advantages. You can be cheaper, or you can just focus on a real tight niche, a vertical, or you can focus on one feature and do it really well. And then you expand from there. And then as you go up market, you raise your prices. And that's the natural progression, because you don't, as you go up market, churn will usually go down. Lifetime value will go up. You can then use more marketing approaches because you have more money to pour into it. It's all those things. So yeah, we raised every chance I could every time. It was terrifying. And I was concerned we were going to break the business. And that's the biggest thing I tell entrepreneurs is, we know you should raise your pricing, and you do too. Usually the objection is an emotional one. And so I will actually talk founders through it of hey, it's an experiment. Put it on your pricing page and watch it for 2 weeks and see how it feels, right? See what the conversions are like, see what the churn is like. And there are ways to do it, right? We actually liked our price points because we were $49.99, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So we actually reduced the number of subscribers per plan rather than raising the actual dollar amount, because I didn't want $59.109, right? I didn't want 70, right? I liked the $49.99 for that particular space. So we went from whatever 3,000 subscribers, at 49 to 2,500, and that's a different way of essentially raising prices.
That's really interesting. And talking about this moment where you're scared, afraid, what was for you the toughest time in growing Drip or?
I think the hardest part, certainly the hardest prolonged part was the acquisition. I don't know if you've sold a company like that. I've sold products before, and it's all right, you're going to give me 50 grand for this, a couple $100,000, whatever. But selling a company like that was really, really hard. It was 6 months of hard negotiation. So for sure, that was it. In terms of growing it, the hardest part was we launched. I had this audience. I had 3,500 people on an email launch list. We got to $8,000 a month, 8 to 10 grand a month in MRR. I'm I know how to do this. I've been doing this for almost 8 years, 9 years. And then we just plateaued, and we were churning everybody. We didn't have product market fit. We were just churning, just bleeding customers. And I was could not grow it, spent months. That was devastating to me. And then it was a rehash of, okay, we don't actually have product market fit. We built kind of a product. It's a great product, but it doesn't do what people need. And then it took us about 6 months to really, weave and figure out, that's what we need to build to get everybody excited about it.
Can you walk us through when you're in that phase, what's your plan? Do you say, okay, let's organize user interviews or talk with our users, spend time with them? What type of question were you asking? Were you trying to I don't know, force people to call you if they want to churn? How did you make sure to have people on the phone?
Yeah, no, I didn't do any of the forced call stuff, but yeah, I had a lot of conversations with customers, a lot of them via email, to be honest. We definitely instituted the, ask why you canceled. And we did it via an email automation as Drip would do. We didn't ask, people click cancel, they're done. And then, 10 minutes later, they'd get an email. Hey, Rob, founder here, curious why you canceled. It would really help me, even if you can just give me one sentence, right? And so we started seeing some patterns of I thought this would do, I'm on Mailchimp and I like Drip a lot better, but you don't do, you don't send broadcast emails. That was a first one. And it's okay, do we really want to become an ESP? Because we weren't yet. So I started seeing patterns like that, right? And then we did build broadcasting, and it's you know what? You kind of do what Mailchimp does now, but Mailchimp's cheaper. But I've heard about this thing called automations, and email automation is becoming a thing. Again, this was 2013. So it's there wasn't the, tags and click a link to put them in a bucket. That was really only in expensive tools. And so that was where we found the opportunity. I resisted that, actually. I said, I don't want to build marketing automation. I'm a bootstrap lifestyle entrepreneur. That sounds really complicated, And so it took me months to wrestle with that emotionally. And then eventually I said, let's go all in on this. I think there's an opportunity here.
And did you feel like during these hard times with your co-founders, what was the feeling? Was it like, okay, we're in this together, or were there like disagreements where someone thinks we have to go that way and another person the other way?
I can imagine that being the case. It wasn't for us. Now, here's what I'll say. I was the sole founder at that point. So later I had, the contract developer who built Drip later became a W-2 employee, later retroactively got equity, became co-founder. But he was, for the first year and a half, 2 years, was the lead dev. Okay. So as a result, there wouldn't be arguments because it really was just me, right? I mean, I was the one kind of pushing it. And to be frank, he's a lot younger than me. I think he was 23, 24 at the time, and it was my bazillionth, bootstrapped app. And it was really his first or second that he had worked on. So we didn't have conflict, but I'll admit the conflict was internal to me. I probably would have preferred to have conflict with someone else because then at least you can hash it out and brainstorm. It's really hard when it's just you, And there was a bunch of noise too, right? When I make it out like, oh, people were just giving me the answer. No, I would get 50 responses and like 5 to 7 of them would be the same. And then everything else was different. And it's like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And I had to go through a mental process of just saying like, I have some founder gut here that I'm going to go in that direction. Let's spend a month, build something, ship it, see if it changes it,
Nice. There is a quote I like, which is founders don't like data, they like guts, which I think it's...
I think it's a mix, personally, right? It's like, I think you can get too much in your gut and like try to be smarter than numbers and what people are telling you. I don't necessarily look at a bunch of data in a spreadsheet, but to me, 20 customer interviews or 20 customers telling you XYZ, that's data too. It's just qualitative, not quantitative, right? And so that was the information that I was parsing. And I mixed that with kind of some founder gut because you can never get to 100% certainty with startups. Maybe with all pre-validation and customers telling you should do it, maybe you get to 50, 60% in my book. And the rest of it has to come from the founder.
Nice. And moving on to, your latest venture, TinySeed, because I'm guessing people listening right now might wonder, you've done a lot of bootstrap, even though you were not really against fundraising or anything, but now raising fund to help bootstrap entrepreneurs. Can you maybe explain why it makes sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. So if you go back even 10 years. Really, if you want to let's say you want to start a SaaS startup or start a startup, you can either bootstrap or you can raise venture funding. And venture funding has really specific strings attached to it. Like they want $1 billion outcome, maybe a $10 billion. And now you're hearing decacorns, right? That don't bet. Crazy. Yeah, I mean, that's just nuts. So that's maybe 1% of startups, maybe should raise venture. What happens to the other 99%, right? So that became the model for a third option, which is this in-between funding. You can call it indie funding or alternative alt funding, but it's basically a small amount of funding that doesn't put you on the venture track. Because normally if you raise a seed round, then you need a Series A, a B, a C, blah, got to go public, got to sell. But company or orgs like TinySeed, Indie.vc before us, they're now shut down. We will write a small check. Our checks are usually between $120,000 and $300,000. And then if you want to then use that to kind of grow your business in the early days and then take off profits, then do it, right? You can run it like a bootstrap company. If you want to sell it in a few years, then do that. If you want to raise subsequent rounds, which I believe about 30% of our TinySeed companies have gone on to do, you can go do that. There's still only 1 or 2 of 59 companies we funded, I believe 2 right now are kind of eyeing the venture track. Everyone else is saying, no, because I just want to take this 100 to 300 grand And I want to get there faster. I want to, because product market fit, the early days, you and I both know that having the money from our prior efforts really helped kickstart it. And that's what this is. It's enough money to get to escape velocity without the agony and pain of like, I'm working a day job and I can only work nights and weekends on this thing, right? We can let, people accelerate growth that way.
For us, it's for Lemlist, we started with $1,000. So it was really like harsh. But when we started like Lampod, like the scale went, I don't know, like it took us maybe like I would say 3 months to do what we did in 12 months.
Wow. And that was because you had a bit of your own funding, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we had resources, like, so we could spend the Lemlist money on growing like a team or doing these things. And we keep doing the same thing with the different project that we're launching. But
if you're effective with it, it really makes a difference, a small amount. It doesn't need to be a ridiculous amount like you see in the papers,
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like what you're offering with 120 to 300 is just enough to get like a few employees, spend a bit money on, like doing something cool and just get started faster. So it's really interesting. And something you mentioned that I'm curious is you said if they want to run the business and take some dividends, they can. So whenever they are taking dividends, like, do you also get dividends or are you out of this part?
Yeah, that's so if they want to go that route, let's say we purchase, X% of their company, then they have a maximum salary that they can take out of the company, which is $250,000 US.
Yeah.
And if they want to then take more money out of the company, then they pull it out as a dividend, as you said, and X% of that dividend goes to us and the rest goes to them. And that number, I mean, X is like a small, like 10%, right? Okay. It's like we usually buy 10 to 12%. So that's it. But they can, I mean, to take $250K out without paying us, that's play. In my book, that's a pretty good salary.
It is. And okay, so that's cool because most, I don't know any VC who would actually accept dividends, whenever they put money in the company.
That's a big difference. Yeah, with us. I mean, a couple of big differences. Like there's in the US, there's C Corps and there's LLCs. And if you go to VCs, they say you need to be a Delaware C Corp. That's all we fund. Whereas we fund C Corps and LLCs in all 50 United States, right? And so it's more work for us, but we also want to be flexible with people. And then in addition, the dividends is another thing. And then the outcomes, we just don't force the outcomes. We want to give more optionality that if you do want to go venture, you can do it. Our terms do not like deter that. If you just want to raise another small round or two, that's fine. If you want to grow it, profitable, and just make it a lifestyle business, that's cool too. The couple big things we say are like, I say, look, if you don't want to grow it to at least 7 figures in ARR, you're not a fit for us. Like our model doesn't work. If you're going to become a $500,000 a year business, that's great. Go do that. But like, there's nothing there for us, and then the exits, it's usually like, if you want to sell before, I'd say about 10 million, probably that isn't going to work for us. I mean, it depends if you get there fast, but like these companies are worth 10 million so fast. I mean, you can get to 2 million ARR now growing, 50% a year. And like, you can sell for 10 million or north of it. It's not like it takes you 10 years to get to that amount.
No, that's for sure. And what are the results so far? Like, because when exactly did you launch the TinySeed? Was it in
Well, so we announced it in 2018. We funded our first batch 2 years ago, and we've done 4 batches of a total of 59.
Any startup like who crossed 1 million ARR yet?
Yes, yes, we have 5. Is that right? I think it's 5 or 6 have crossed 1 million ARR. We had one company exit, which was I'll say it's like a base hit, like a single or double. It wasn't like some 20x return, but it was a multiple, on the return. It's still early, but to be honest, the results, like our VCs say IRR, it's an internal rate of like it is on par with, top 20% or whatever of venture funds. So it's like the returns so far are good, but you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen long term. I'm just the model has worked out. I like to say we have product market fit with it now. Investors are happy, and certainly founders are happy to take the funding, which was a risk at the time, right? Because we were trying to innovate on something.
That's really cool. And since you're innovating, on the fund and on the way you're spending the money, are you innovating also on the business model? Because I know the way like VC traditionally work, they have their kind of like a fee for a management fee, meaning that they can spend a bit of the money for hiring, etc. and on the side they get like a small percentage of the outcome. How does that work for you? Did you also like challenge that part a bit, or?
No, we do it the same way. It's called 2 and 20 is standard, right? 2% management fee, and then 20% of it's after the investors get paid back what they put in, then it's 20% of the profit. Which if we were a venture fund, just a fund, not an accelerator, good Lord, we would be so rich. But we spend all our management fee because it's 2% a year, although we front loaded a little bit because we have a staff of 5 people running an accelerator, right? Whereas again, if I was just writing checks, I'd be raking it in. So we didn't innovate on that, not because there was no reason to, and B, we knew we needed the cash to do this well, right? We hired someone right from the start, and then we just hired another person.
That's really cool. I know like time is flying, so I'm gonna close this with the 3 last questions. What's your favorite book or podcast?
So, I have more than 800 books in my Audible account. So it's a very hard question for me. I also listen to about 40 different podcasts. So I'm going to say one of my favorite based on how long I've been subscribed to it, is a podcast about bootstrapping. It's called The Tropical MBA. It's hosted by Dan and Ian. They've been doing it since before, one of the few that's been doing it since before me, and 2009. So Tropical MBA, highly recommended.
Really cool. Favorite bootstrap founder, and also you have to explain why.
Yeah. So again, I literally know thousands, so I can't pick a single favorite, but I will say I have long respected a bootstrap founder named Ruben Gomez. He bootstrapped BidSketch, which is proposal software. While he was working a full-time job, then quit the job, ran that, and then he launched Signwell, which is electronic signature, and he's competing with DocuSign, and all the big folks. And he is meticulous and disciplined and just shows up every day. He doesn't have a big online presence. He doesn't have a podcast, but I tell you what, all of my good ideas I feel like I get from that guy.
Nice. That's super interesting. We should have him on the show.
You should.
What's your favorite thing to do if you want to regain motivation, energy? I know you play guitar, but maybe...
Yeah, there's a lot. My wife's a psychologist, right? And a founder consultant. So we talk about this a lot, actually. Founder mental health is such a big deal, and burnout and all that. The big thing that I do is I take time away from work where I stop thinking about work. And usually that's time with my kids. We have VR headsets, the Oculus, and we go in and we play stupid paintball. And I stop thinking about work, right? Or I'll take a complete day or a couple days off. I found I worked a little too hard and thought a little too much about my prior startups, to the point where I felt like it was being productive and it actually was burning me out. And so the favorite thing to do is not work and not think about it. Anything but.
So curious, I know I said it was the last question, but now I have another one. How do you figure out that, like there is this fine line between feeling that you are productive, whether you are burning out? Like what was for you like the key signals when you reach that point?
Of burnout?
Yeah, like in between,
Yeah, it was when I started I would open my email inbox and I'd look at my Trello board, which is where I have my to-dos. And I would sigh and I would say, I don't want to do any of this. Like, I'm so unmotivated. And I remember I started telling some of my friends, we'd go out for drinks and I'd say, I remember saying this sentence, I guess I'm just not a very motivated person. And one of my friends is like, who are you, dude? Like, do you realize what you've built? He's like, you're in a weird space, right? It was a mental space. I needed a mental check from an outsider of like, It's not that you're not motivated. It's you're not motivated right now. Why is that? And taking time away is usually, the big key to getting it back.
Nice. So surrounding yourself with caring people is super important.
It's a big one. Yep.
Awesome. Well, Rob, thanks a lot. I think it was a really, really cool chat. Where can people find you or get in touch with you? What's the best way?
Yeah, folks, listen to podcasts, startupsfortherestofus.com, or in any, podcast app is really the place. 30, 40 minutes a week. This is what I talk about. And I have been doing that for 11 years. And of course on Twitter, at Rob Walling.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. Have an amazing day. Take care.
Thanks so much for having me, G.
Thank you for listening to the Bootstrap Stories, the only podcast where bootstrap entrepreneurs share their journey in all transparency. If you enjoyed this episode, don't hesitate to leave us a review. And in case you want to see the interview, all episodes are live on the Guillaume Moubeche YouTube channel. Check out the link in the description and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Have an amazing day and make sure to also join us in our amazing Bootstrap community where we all helped each other to become successful and grow a profitable business. Take care and talk to you soon.